normally how we start. Okay, where are we in our journey? Right, where are we in our journey? So, the following is where we're up to. Last time we started with the intricate and interesting topic of why do bad things happen to good people? Okay, or why do good things happen to bad people? And to be honest, last time we talked about, hey Jeremy, last time we talked about that these may be two distinct topics, why bad things happen to good people, good things happen to bad, or they may be two sides of the one coin. Okay, what we effectively did last time is without sounding like we did nothing, we outlined the issues. Yeah, meaning we talked about why is it kind of this struggle? Why is it, so to speak, a massive problem dilemma that we don't know why bad things happen to good people? And we ended up with three levels of question, not answer, just question, because we're going to go through the approaches this evening. Number one, it's not fair. Why would God act that way? Number two, it doesn't seem to fit with the Torah's narrative. You do good, you get good. And number three, there was a Rosh Hashanah element as well in terms of what the book of life looked like. Okay, this evening I'd like to do the approaches. Everyone okay with that?
Yeah.
Yeah, in other words, at some point in life, the rabbi needs to get to the answers. Yeah, I think that's fair enough. And therefore, that is what we're going to do this evening. Now, I'm going to start with a very precarious thing, namely sharing a screen, which sometimes works and sometimes absolutely doesn't. Or even when it doesn't, it sometimes shares something absolutely completely confidential, which thank God it hasn't. Just the dates of our school events next year. That's okay. Actually, once during the latter stages of COVID, when Zoom was no longer a novelty, if one remembers such ages and stages, I decided to share a screen in a share, and I had written on a Word document, Word document saying with the title saying my favorite people in the share. Right, it was a total joke. Right, and I kind of picked the people I thought would kind of find the most funny, and basically they're they're exaggerating big, then one guy in small. I said, "Oh goodness, I didn't mean to share this document." Anyway, be that as it may. Okay, let's go. So, why do good people suffer ever? Right? Why would that be? So we're going to see four or five answers, and then hopefully we'll get to what I call the real answer. Now, I know that's really unfair because if you've got four or five answers, how can then you have a real answer? But bear with me. And um, who was it? As Basil Fawlty said, my wife will explain everything. Okay, so let's go. The first answer, and it's a classic answer, is purification. Now, what does purification mean? It means as follows. So here's the concept. There is this world and the next world. We're familiar with that because we spent a whole month learning about it, meaning this world is where actions are performed. The next world is where actions are rewarded. If you're sports or sporty, it's the training ground versus the game, or actually the game versus the award ceremony, whatever it is. Okay, the dress rehearsal versus the real thing. Meaning, we are put in this world to better ourselves, to pass challenges, to do mitzvot, to become more godly towards each other and generally. And we are rewarded in the world to come. That is axiomatic in Jewish thought. And we spent ages discussing that. We're going to take that as a given because what that means is that also defines what is worthwhile in this world. Meaning, let's say you've got two, let's talk about a good person, right? In front of them, they can either, I don't know, cross someone across the street, like a nice citizen, or give charity. Which one is, which, you can only do one. Which one is better? Or maybe let's put it differently. How would I choose which one is better?
Well, if you give to tzedakah, you're going to benefit more than just one person, would be the
Quite possibly.
theory.
Depending on who you're giving, yeah, 100%. Yeah. So I think there are various arguments kind of for each one. On the one hand, crossing someone across the road is like personal. The other one's only with money, but there might be a ripple effect with the money, etc. What we're interested in is how would you decide? In other words, without any notion of world to come or even divine command, you kind of, well, it's kind of a nice logical, I think this, I think that, but there's no rubric of right or wrong per se. It's just logic. Now, logic has its own compelling nature, But the world to come will govern a lot of our decisions in this world because that's the destination. It's like anything, parenting, right? What will govern my reaction when my kids are kicking and screaming and don't want to eat their supper, right? So if it's I want them to stop, then that'll be one reaction. Yeah. If it's I want to continue to build a long-term relationship, that will engender a very different reaction. Right? Destination will define present, like anyone training for anything. So here we go. This source on the page is a Gemara in Masechta Shabbos, one of the sections of the Talmud, and there are various that say like this, but the idea it says is as follows: is God will pay a righteous person back for anything wrong they've done in this world by suffering in this world, so that in the next world, which is the place of real reward, they will be able to be rewarded more. Yeah. In other words, if you're righteous, you'd rather be invested in that world more than this world. And therefore, anything you've done wrong in this world, you'd rather it be paid off in this world rather than the next world. Yeah, it's a little bit like if you had a choice between £1 and £1. Unless you're a tremendously nostalgic South African, yeah, you're going to choose the pound because it's just worth more, right? So if you're going to take a hit on £1 or £1, right, you'd rather take a hit on you get what I'm saying, right? So Hashem says, look, with righteous people, I'm going to make sure they end up in the next world absolutely pure. Therefore, the suffering is going to atone for things that they do in this world. We're going to give it to them in this world so that they get pure by the time they get upstairs, so to speak. Yeah, that is a classic Jewish answer. And the reverse would be true of wicked people. Namely, they're going to get paid back in this world by having a tremendously easy life sometimes for all the good things they did in this world, because in the next world, they're going to get their comeuppance. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yeah, fair enough. Yeah. And again, God will kind of work out who's righteous or not. We're going to get there in a second, actually. But that's that concept. It is a classic concept, meaning it's found in many, many places. In short, it's called purification. Okay, purification. Now, approach number 2 is to say, well, there's a greater good here. Now, the way I love to define this or express this is no one would wish challenges upon themselves per se. Let's put it like that, right? But there have been a tremendous amount of people and charities founded when one individual suffered. Right? Think of the myriad of charities that were founded because one person or people went through a difficult situation. Right? Loads of them. Right? And you can go further, schools dedicated to this one, to that one, etc. A lot of charities that deal with illness were because a certain person was ill and the charity was set up in their name, right? Or dedicated to them, that others shouldn't go through, etc. Meaning, approach number 2 says, bad things happen to good people because sometimes there's a sense of greater good. We just don't always see that. Right? In other words, challenges sometimes bring out something in a person that we never knew. So here there's some examples. For example, one thing the Gemara says in Yevamos is it elicits prayer, which is, in other words, you see how high God sees prayer in terms of priorities. Rabbi Yitzchak said, why were the Avot created barren, unable to have children initially? Because Hashem wanted them to pray. That's a remarkable accolade as to what prayer is. But again, that's this concept. There's suffering, there's challenge in order to engender a certain higher reaction, so to speak. Okay? And the Gemara in Chagiga says it quite interestingly, says that God found poverty to be a good thing. Again, we have to define that for the Jewish people, because when the Jewish people get wealthy, they sometimes forget about God. Right? They feel they're independent. They don't need him. Right? So again, the concept here is that there's an amount of suffering to create something greater. Okay. And again, various examples of it. I've got some on the screen over here in terms of challenges causing someone to call out to God. I had many people in my previous community in Stanmore who had stories like that, where God forbid that they were ill or something happened to them, and as a result, they kind of turned their life around and they developed a newfound sensitivity in certain areas of Jewish practice. Now, again, we're not God, we're not prophets, so we can't say it was worth that for that, right? We don't know we don't know the equations, but certainly the concept of a challenge brings out something that I never knew I had is again another axiomatic Jewish concept. Make sense? Great. Okay, so again, we've got two so far. One is purification, and the other one is challenge, or call it for the greater good. Right? Those would be two pathways as to why righteous people may have some element of suffering. Okay, let's go to number three. I hate to be a bit blasé about this. I'm just going to try to get through some material. Okay, number three is fascinating. No more blasé. Number three is fascinating because it's talking about preserving free will. So here's an interesting one. Again, I've got the sources on the screen, but it's as follows. If we lived in a world in which anyone who did something good was rewarded with some form of pot of gold, right? You imagine you woke up in the morning and you made a coffee you made a coffee for someone, right? Or you put tefillin on, yeah? And suddenly there was a pot of gold waiting for you, right? That'd be great. Yeah, or anytime you gave charity or helped an old woman across the street, you found some, I don't know, whatever, another pot of gold. Yeah, without any rainbow, just the gold. Yeah. That would be a remarkable world. And imagine if every time you did something wrong, suddenly there was a ping and your banking app went down. I mean, the money came out your account. Yeah. We wouldn't really have much free will. Do you know what I mean? In other words, you just obviously you do good because you'd see the consequences so readily and so apparently. And the same would be, by the way, for kids. If every time a kid did something good, they got rewarded immediately, they'd get to the point where they weren't choosing to do something good. They're just choosing the reward. Want to hear that? Yeah, that makes sense. So in other words, yeah, thanks. Just checking everyone's all right. Yeah, in others, there has to be some element of, I guess you'd call it peril or danger, or maybe things a little bit hazy, kind of, purposefully constructed haze, divine fog, right? Such that free will is something that's real. If there was total clarity, then there'd be no case for free. We wouldn't really be choosing. There wouldn't be a moral dilemma. Should I do good? Should I do bad? If good always ended up with they lived happily ever after, reward immediate, bang, and punishment was immediate, bang. Yeah, by the way, that's part of why they started sinning in the desert. They just couldn't take it. As in the wilderness, in the Bible, in the Torah, things were so immediate whenever they sinned. Think of the biblical narrative. Someone sinned and there's the ground opens up, etc. Immediately, whatever it was, right? They couldn't take that. They tried to break out. Right, so again, approach number one is purification. This world, next world. Approach number two is challenges bring out the greater good. And approach number three is preserving free will. Preserving free will. Important. Right. What about approach number four? I don't normally say this. I'm going to preface this with the words, this is not a Christian concept. Very much, if you look at your screen, it very much sounds like it, right? Atonement for the generation. So with super, super righteous people, the kind of people that spend their Wednesday nights logging on to a share, those kind of people. So it says that the suffering inflicted on a tzaddik, someone who's righteous, to atone for the generation. Well, that suffering is to atone for the generation, right? Because to some extent they are the peak of the generation, and therefore when they suffer, there's kind of a ripple effect of atonement. That doesn't mean you should go and find your local tzaddik and kind of, slash their tires and say, well, it's good for us, yeah, kind of stuff. It doesn't mean that. But it means, some element of suffering the righteous person does filter down to atone for the generation. Okay? Not a Christian concept, although sounds very much like something they have, what's the nice way of saying it? Emulated. Okay, that's approach number 4. Approach number 5 is something we hinted to in share number 1 on the topic, which is as follows. Who's a tzaddik anyway? Do you remember this one? Meaning, we've got a very interesting definition of righteous and wicked. It's when I say we, I mean colloquially, not Jewishly. And if I say righteous, yeah, you probably think of someone with a long beard living in some, really religious neighborhood of Jerusalem or something like that, right? And they're just, I don't know, studying Torah all day with intermittent prayer, right? And if you think of someone wicked, you probably think of someone, I don't know, in some form of prison somewhere or whatever it is. Yeah, and something like that. That's like someone wicked. It's very interesting as an aside. In this conference in Atlanta I was at last week, and we had a roundtable discussion on various points. And one of them was, how do you get people to attend your things? Right. So we were around the table kind of, asking that question. And one of them was like, I don't have a problem. I've got a captive audience. So everyone looked at this person, this rabbi from, I forget what state he was from, saying, oh, how do you do that? He says, well, I work for an organization that goes into prisons and services Jewish inmates. Right. So I said, yeah, you're right. You do. Everyone's right. Yeah, you do. We don't really have to recruit for that. Anyway, let's come back to this. Point being, who is a tzaddik? It goes as follows. A tzaddik, someone who's righteous, it's not an objective standard per se. Meaning, the Torah says what are good things to do, mitzvot, and what are bad things to do, sins, but the Torah doesn't say where we are on that journey. So a tzaddik, someone who's righteous, has basically developed or grown or moved their flag in life. As I once quoted, someone who has started off their life as a serial killer and then has moved to not killing but just stealing, they have moved their flag. That is an achievement. You still do not want them as your next door neighbor, right? But that is an achievement. They are called in Torah terms a tzaddik. They're doing things wrong, don't get me wrong, but they have moved their flag. Someone who grows up their entire life religious and never invests in it, and doesn't really want to do it, but they just feel compelled for social pressure, that even though they're doing righteous things, if they haven't put themselves into it, let's say they even degenerated, then the fellow who has moved from killing to stealing is much more righteous than the fellow who feels compelled to do things, but they don't really want to and kind of, shies away from it. Even though one is doing more, the other one is more of a tzaddik. We get that? As one has moved their flag more than the other. Make sense?
Yeah.
Great. Okay, good. So this is basically what the Malbim says. When we talk about righteous people suffering, we don't know who's righteous. We don't. Now, again, it's not for us to judge, but it's for us to know that our standard judgment points are not necessarily accurate. Right? He says over here, 196, the bottom, we define a tzaddik based on what we see with our own senses. If we see him or her doing good and avoiding evil, we think he's a tzaddik. However, we only see the outer shell, not the inner core inside of them. We don't know the heavenly conditions for considering him a tzaddik or a rasha. That's quite poignant. Meaning the way they would say it in the Gemara is our world is a world of falsehood. We just see external impression. Right? We don't see what's inside. It's a classic Jewish thinking. Again, you could have two people doing exactly the same thing, right? One, let's put them next to each other, and one getting far more reward than the other. Two people putting on tefillin, two people giving charity, one getting far more reward than the other because one of them is doing it because they want to and they want to develop and grow and they believe in it. And the other one's doing it because they're compelled. They just feel like, I can't be embarrassed. Yeah, that's totally same action, but totally different reward.
We also have our own perceptions based on our own experiences anyway.
Yes, 100%. Yeah, 100%.
So, yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Difficult not, and it's a difficult human trait to not judge.
Absolutely.
It's something that we do, but it's partly about trying to evaluate what we see and what we hear and figuring it out. And I guess to some extent we do judge things on that, even though we don't have all the information.
Yeah, true, 100%. Yeah, we're limited. Sometimes we have to judge, but we're limited. The other way of saying it is that challenges force a person to do tshuva. That's another famous way of saying it. All that is absolutely true, as summarized in this paragraph, which I'm going to skip if that's okay, because I'd like to get to the last approach. Are you ready for this? You can, if you like, I'll put something nice on the screen that's not Disney. While I'm saying this, a bit of a summary as to why wicked people sometimes live it up in life. So here's the issue. We've now learnt together cogently and successfully 5 beautiful approaches as to why righteous people may suffer. And they all make sense. They all make sense. And they're all sourced. These sources are minimally 200 to 500 years old-ish, more or less. The problem is this. Do you remember when we started, we said that the great Moshe Rabbeinu, he asked God this very question. In fact, he asked 4 questions. Why do some righteous people suffer? Why do some righteous people prosper? Why do some wicked people prosper? Why do some wicked people suffer? And God said, I can't tell you. Now, here's the problem. I know kids think they're wiser than their parents, but we don't think we're wiser than Moshe. Meaning, why is it that we've spent the last 25 minutes addressing this core question and Moshe had to ask God and God said, I'm not telling you? You hear the problem? How does that configure? How does that configure? So I think something here is really, really, really important. This is the Gemara I was quoting, by the way. Sorry, I've got it over here. I think something is really important just to understand over here, which is basically like this, and I'll put it on the screen if you want to read it as we go along. It's as follows. There's a difference between a reason and a pathway. Meaning, I guess the best way of saying it is the way one of the philosophers put it, which is history has to be lived forwards, but can only be understood backwards. Meaning, ultimately, we don't have a full picture. We can't. We are finite and we're living in the present. God is infinite and he lives way beyond all of the present, right? And we may inflict harm or punishment on someone for a constructive reason. We know that. If a kid walks out into the street, then they will be shouted at to get them away from a car. No question about that, right? That's necessary punishment, right? The kid thinks that's really harsh and how dare them, but they don't know there's a car coming in 30 seconds. Yeah. So as humans, we are definitively, by definition, finite. That means we only know a speck of the picture, right? If you want the parable form, it's like, sometimes you have these government officials that need to know everything but lack the expertise. If they're interested. So it's like a government official walking through the nuclear, one massive nuclear factory. And the government official realizes very quickly he has no idea what's going on in any of this part of the factory. He just doesn't know the science. Yeah. And he walks up to some cog somewhere and he says, I'm not giving you any more funding until you explain what this cog is needed for. Yeah. Now, he doesn't know the whole factory. He's just picking on a cog. Yeah, he's just picking on a cog. Meaning, we sometimes say, look, I don't know what that part of my life is, right? I don't know why that happened. We don't know why anything happened. Let's bring it back a stage. When I was a community rabbi, no one ever came to me with the following. No one ever said, look, Rabbi, my life is fantastic. I just got a pay rise at work. I got loads of friends. Everything's going fantastically. I'm about to, run the marathon. I don't know why God is doing this to me. No one ever said that to me. Right? Why? Because they weren't philosophically bothered when life was going great. If God forbid something bad happened, I was slept over and asked, why does God do this to me? Now, in truth, they don't know, neither do we, why God would do good to that person more than why God would do bad to them. We're equally finite. We're equally constrained. Right? Moshe was the only one who was willing to ask all 4 questions. Meaning, why do good things happen to good people? Why do good things happen to bad people? Why do bad things happen to good people? Why do bad things happen to bad people? Right? Since he asked the entire picture, he was told, we don't really know and I can't tell you. In other words, if you're looking for the ultimate answer, we don't know, we can't know. If you're looking for pathways that make sense, then we've got lots of pathways that make sense. Purification, challenge, greater good, atonement. They are perfect answers that make a lot of sense. They're just not the ultimate answer because ultimately we can't pinpoint in any given situation. Does that make sense?
Mm.
Yeah, I know it's a
Yeah.
little bit of a whistle-stop tour, but I think it's really important. It's true of a lot of things in reference to working out why God would do X and Y. Right? With the benefit of hindsight, we can see. It's just we don't always have the benefit of hindsight. We don't, and even recent events in history will tell you what hindsight.
Mm.
There's no bigger proof of not being able to see the entire picture than kind of current Israeli events. It's almost like a domino effect. There was this, and then there's this. Oh, and that led I didn't think it would end up over there. And oh, then there was Iran, and then there was this. We never knew where it was going. Right now, I'm not saying anything was necessarily justified in hindsight, but you see how only knowing a part of the picture can create such a skewed view of the entire story. So ultimately, we don't know, and that's fine. We live with that. That's okay. We're not in charge of history. Right? But pathways, there are many, many appropriate and acceptable pathways to understand why God would. We just can't necessarily plug anyone into any given situation. Good?
Mm.
Yeah.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank
Food for
you.
thought.
Thank
I'm going to
you.
put it on the YouTube channel, and I'll put it on the group. And then please go next week. I think we're going to start with miracles. Thank you, Simon. We are thinking of you. We really are. People ask daily. Simon, wishing you a refuah shlema. It's
Oh.
good, really, really good to see you, and thank you for logging on. Okay, see you, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
Thank you.
you. Bye.
Bye.